I rise to move Amendment 99, which seeks to remove the restriction that only trade union representatives or a work colleague may accompany an employee to a disciplinary or grievance hearing. I'd like to thank the noble Lords, Lord Sharp of Epsom, Lord Ashcombe and Lord Lonsborough for supporting what is, I think, a modest and practical but important change to employment law. It will give workers the right to be accompanied to a hearing by someone they trust, somebody of their choosing, perhaps a family friend, a carer, a person from the relevant industry. It's about fair play and equal treatment, and it ends a one-size-fits-all effective union monopoly and is simply empowering and modernising. My amendment is similar to that proposed by the noble Lord Palmer in Amendment 98, which would expand those who would accompany workers to include trained and certified companions. I support the principle behind the noble Lord Palmer's proposal, but fear its certification regime is unnecessarily complicated and could result in delays and inconsistencies. And it could create bureaucratic barriers, especially for staff cohorts such as young employees unfamiliar with the bureaucratic paraphernalia of such procedures. My Amendment 99 takes a simpler, fairer path that lets the worker decide who accompanies them. There's no regulatory ambiguity. It just creates a clear, new workers' right. But where the noble Lord Palmer and I agree is on the fundamentals, and I think particularly on the need to update the law. The original part of the employment law that we are talking about was enacted in the 1990s when trade union membership was significantly higher than it currently is. But this one-size-fits-all approach is wholly out of step with the modern world that we're living in. Significant reference has already been made to today's reality that not every employee is represented by a trade union, and of the 20% or so who are, the majority are in the public sector. So nearly 80% of workers are not trade union members. That includes care workers, teaching assistants, agency staff, cleaners, people in roles that are often low-paid, insecure and lacking representation. Widening the scope of the right to be accompanied in the way the amendment proposes will empower those workers. Now, I want to ask the question, why aren't people in unions? Sometimes during committee debates, the inference has been that the only reason that workers aren't in a union is because of wicked anti-trade union laws or perhaps evil Tory government policies. But I'd say it's rather more complicated. In just the last week, the Labour peer, the noble Lord Winston, a lifelong member of the British Medical Association, resigned from the BMA over its handling of strike action. Meanwhile, the Cabinet Minister championing this very bill, the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, has reportedly been suspended from her own union, Unite, in a dispute over her membership and the Birmingham bin strike. Whatever the merits of either case, they demonstrate that even the most senior, well-connected, pro-union individuals can find themselves without the support of a union. Then there's the thorny issue of what happens when trade unions increasingly ape the activism of student unions, often to the consternation of their members. Last week, Professor David Hirsch posted a devastating critique of his own academic union, and this is just to give you a taster of what he said, and to quote him. He said, "I am a founder member of UCU, and I was a member of the AUT before that, but I am resigning today. UCU has become," he tells us, quote, "by far the most toxic, bullying, anti-Semitic space I have ever been in." And the final straw for Professor Hirsch was UCU's statement standing up for recently prescribed Palestine action. And what do you do when your own union acts in lockstep with your employers or HR on grievances with a political undercurrent? Nurse Sandy Peggy, an intensive care nurse of 30 years' experience, who I've mentioned before, was suspended from her role because she objected to getting undressed in front of a male resident doctor who identifies as a woman. Nurse Peggy is now suing her own union, the Royal College of Nursing, the RCN, for its failure to defend her because it supported the NHS Trust's trans-inclusive policies, so she could hardly have them as adequate representatives or accompanying her. As an aside, Nurse Peggy at last won her employment tribunal when the NHS 5 Trust dropped their charges of gross misconduct allegations, having wasted a huge amount of taxpayers' resources, and that only happened last night, so congratulations to her. But in another case highlighted by EDAPT that offers legal support for school staff, Higgs versus Farmer School, a teaching assistant was called into a disciplinary hearing lasting 6.5 hours. The school brought a lawyer. Kirsty Higgs faced a possible end to her employment and her reputation and asked if she could bring her father for support. That request was refused. The law did not permit it. By the way, the employer was eventually found to have unfairly dismissed Mrs Higgs. But one part of her story shows how unfair all this is. Because Mrs Higgs wasn't in a union, she was left alone opposite a lawyer and her bosses and was unsupported. She was, however, told that she could bring a colleague. But as others have noted, surely any colleague working with her might be fearful, knowing that Mrs Higgs was being disciplined for expressing opinions about sex and relationship education at her son's school, not even the school she was employed at. And if you as a colleague accompanied her in a grievance hearing, you might fear that your school's senior leadership team might assume you shared her opinions, and then you might be disciplined too. In one final example, a judge calls Parliament to act. The case of Leeds Dental Team Limited versus Rose, where Ms Rose, a non-unionised worker, asked to bring her solicitor her disciplinary hearing. The employer refused. The law backed the bosses again. Had she been a union member, she could have been able to bring the union solicitor. Instead, she faced the hearing entirely alone, and the judge even commented on this, calling the situation harsh and making it clear that the worker was seriously disadvantaged. But the judge said his hands were tied by the wording of the law and concluded that change would need to come from Parliament. Well, my lords, Amendment 99 or 98 answer his call. And while the government constantly kicks challenges to this bill down the road to post-hoc consultations or regulations, that won't work here. The restrictions in the Employment Relations Act 1999 mean this issue requires primary legislation to empower workers to exercise their rights. To conclude, I want to take the noble Baroness, the Minister, at her word when she stated on Monday that this bill would, quote, raise the minimum floor of employment rights. If that is true, we must ensure that all workers stand on that floor, not just those who have chosen to join a trade union. How can it be just or fair that two workers facing identical disciplinary proceedings have radically different statutory rights simply because one is a member of a union and the other is not, for a multitude of reasons that I hope I've demonstrated? This is the very two-tier attitude to workers, the very approach that the Minister has been so keen to counter. So I therefore hope that on this very sensible and practical matter that the Government will actually accept either or both of these amendments.
My Lord.